Okay, now we're going to start on the portion of PHP where we also do database connectivity. Now, I've given you the product manager folder that you can unzip. And remember, in order to make this to where I can see and access the database and work with PHP, you have to bring up XAMPP. You have to make it so that Tomcat, Apache, and MySQL have started. And then in your htdocs, bring up the path localhost after htdocs, and I'm opening the index.php. Now, as we look at this, notice that we have a products list in this section. We have categories. We can add a product, but we can also list categories. So that works within all of our products, within all the categories. I can see the products in one category by clicking on it. I can add a product. Notice our list categories has not been filled in yet, but I can add a product also on these. And add it, and it will take me back to that category of products. Okay. Nothing here. Now I'm going to go back and list products, and let's look at some of the code. Okay, I'm bringing up the index.php, and let's start in. Now remember, we're using a database for this one. So after I have to make sure and get the database, and notice that I'm requiring it once, meaning that it will only pull it in one time. If it's been pulled in before, it won't pull it in again. So let's look at the database portion of it right now. Okay. In this database portion, we have to tell it the name, the database, or the data resolution name, to where we're using MySQL, we're using a local host, and the database name. Within that, we have to tell it the username and password, if they exist. And now we can use this created source, data source name, so that we can, in between our try, build our new PHP database object or data object, where I send it the name, the username, and the password. And I create my database that I'll use throughout my queries. If there's any exceptions, it's going to display my message and include my database error. We'll use the information I've stored in E, and then exit out. All right, let's go back to index. Now from here, if this is the first time I've been through this page, I have not previously set any of the categories in the link, the href. Okay. So if it's not set, then go out and grab it, validate it as an int, the category ID, it's a get, and filter it. If it gives me back a false, I'm going to set it to 1. Okay, now again, if I look at my display, I have to read the database and get this display. Then I'll have to pull from the database again for this display. Okay, so 1, all, all. Category, category, product. So let's go look at it. In order to get just the category that's selected, here's where our queries will start. And again, the queries mostly have the same structure to where I build my query. This one, again, this is not a database course, so we're not going to learn SQL. We're not going to talk about primary keys, secondary key, primary keys, foreign keys, any data integrity or entity integrity. We're just using the database. So I'm selecting everything from the categories where I have a match. And notice this category ID matches what I'm using as my variables up here. Okay, so you create your query. You prepare the query, sending it through DB. Remember, that means a function, taking it through a function. And anytime you're working with an individual, you have to bind the values. Notice we've got them bound here. Execute. Now, once I execute this, I'm only looking for one ID, so I get a fetch versus a fetch all. The fetch gives me one row back in here versus multiple rows. Now, when I go into category, I only want the category name. Notice I'm not using a 0 or a 1. As the index, I'm using a string, the name, the field name, to bring this in. And then I close. Now that gets 1. When I want all the categories, because I want to list all of them as links, small change, I select everything with nowhere, but I put it in ID order because I order by. And again, I prepare. I don't have to bind anything because I'm not after a single one. I execute and I fetch all. That means I get multiple. I'm expecting multiple rows back from my query. And then I close it. Now again, I've got one more display of products. So I'm back to select all the products where my categories match, meaning that I'm not going to pull up all the products. I'm only going to pull up the products that have a category matching to what I typed in or I selected. But I'm still going to order by product ID. Then we go back into prepare it, bind it, execute it. I intend on more than one, so I bind multiple. And you're ready to continue on. I'm going to take a short break, pause this. You can come back into it in a second. Okay, now here, once we get through all that, we're ready to display our information, so we go into our HTML right below all of the PHP. So there's my doc type, my HTML, my style sheets, and even my JavaScript. And now when I look over at this information is the first thing I'm displaying. But notice I'm using all of the categories, but they're links, not just display. So using the array that was built from my get all categories, using its array here, I can go through, and when I'm ready to display it, here I've simply said start PHP, count how many entities are in the categories or how many actually rows I have in my array, and store it in number and echo it back out. That's where this 3 comes right here. Kind of a debugging tip. to work with. Now, I want to display all my categories as links. So every time we have an array, you're going to have some type of for. Remember, we're using the for each and in for each. And this is kind of like a shortcut we had in Java. Taking my array and using it as individual, category is the individual of the array. In my PHP, remember, my two dots mean true or false. Now when I get in here, that is an href telling us to back up one folder. Okay, now I'm going to start in on categories less than or equal to, and notice we've got our question mark. So if categories is equal to the category ID in the array, my PHP echo the individual, so it's telling us where we're going to go if we click on the href. We're heading to the ID is equal to the ID that was selected out of the array by clicking on it. Okay. Now when I look at another section, we've got all this, then I want to display. Notice that I've closed the PHP, then closed the anchor tag, then open the PHP and echo back out the category name, close the anchor. So this is what shows up to the user that's in between our normal open and close anchor tags in the for each. And then we can go through and do the same thing for our products right here. So we turn our PHP on and we're going to display our category name if there is one. If not, when I'm ready to display all of my products, remember I'm doing it inside of a table. So I have information that is just HTML and PHP related. But as we go down to here, notice that I'm in my array again. If I was to scroll up and look at the array I saved our products in, we did our SQL, it would be called $products. As the individual I'm going to use in the code, right after product. Turn off the PHP, HTML, turn back on the PHP, echo out every individual field we want to use inside our form or inside our document. Now, notice that as we've been executing and destroying any of the information, after we display it all, we have data that we are using, but it is hidden. Notice that. Okay, so we're using the product ID and the category ID from the products database. Notice it is hidden. And then we have an input value, HTML. It's a submit button with the value of delete. There's our button. Okay, we're going to do one more thing on this. and then we're going to let you take a break before we do another video on the other half of it. We're only going to look at the delete now. Now again, notice I can delete any one of these by simply going through and just hitting delete. Takes it away. Okay, now we only had one action or one user interaction besides entering information on that form, and that's the delete. And it's got a submit. That's why when we go up and look at this form, the action says call the delete product PHP. Then we can do this. We can do it this way because there is only one action. If I had a delete and an edit button, we wouldn't be able to do this. We have to do it a different way. So if I click on delete, let's look at the delete product. It goes out and the action is a delete product. Okay, good. So again, I can't count on the fact that I have pulled up the right information from the database. So I have to require once, pull in the database. Now remember, if it's already been pulled in once before, it will not do it again because of the require once. I want to go after the product ID and the category ID. Now remember, those were used, but they were hidden. So I can go out and grab those using my filter input, and that's why I put them out there, because I want to make sure that I have access to the primary key and the foreign key. I'm deleting a product. I also have to make sure that product comes out of the category. Now, again, we're not going to get into what we discussed as the anomalies that can happen, or entity or referential integrity. Okay, so we're just wanting a deletion. Okay, I pulled it in. I need to delete it from the database. So if the product ID filter input worked, then it won't have a false. But we got to make sure the category also came back validated. So it has to be equal, not equal to a false. Both these have to be true. Now I'm just going to pull on my SQL that my delete works for only the record I've identified. So build a query. I'm going to delete instead of select, but I'm going to delete from the products where the product is the same as my variable product. That's colons. Prepare it. And again, it's actual variable and data, so I have to bind it. Execute, close. Now once I've done this, it is gone. And I want to go back to my index.php. The include. Okay, so it's going to go back to the index, and again, there's nothing below this. This is already executed, and start up the top again. Checking all the way down and redisplaying the information based upon deletion from our products will be reflected. Okay, now that's the end of that part of it. Take a breather. We'll come back and do the add solution. We'll come back and look at the add product. We haven't got a list categories, so we might also add the code for list categories. So that's two areas we'll look at on our next video, plus anything as far as pulled up by the categories. Thank you. Continue on.